have to really understand that people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you can know everything as far as business practices, and etiquette, but there again, really understanding the empathy and the authenticity that is required as you navigate the corporate landscape as well as working, I would say, within the community. And I really do believe that that's what has allowed me to, I would say, move into a global role at such a fast pace, and working with Fortune 100 companies, and really having that opportunity to work in world class companies. And this is what motivates me, Carlos, in my own work, having that opportunity to really, I would say, create an impact, and contributing towards, I would say, a shared goal within the organizations that I've had the honor of working with, and really being considered as a trusted advisor as well as a partner and leader within the business. And I'm sure my mom would be proud, because she's always told me you leave things better than what they were when you either came or when you joined. And so every organization that I've had the opportunity to work with, this is something that I really, take pride in leaving it better than how I found it, and really leaving that meaningful impact and legacy behind.